I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky.
Hey, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bay Area. We are so glad that you're with us today. Maybe this is only your second time at Bay Area. Maybe last week, Easter, was your first time. Regardless, we're so glad that you're with us. We are all about making passionate, maturing followers of Jesus from here to the nations. And if that excites you, if that intrigues you, if that confuses you, regardless, we are glad that you're with us and we're excited to be together today. My name is Aaron, and I am thrilled to be with the Bay Area fam today. And whether you're joining us from Odenton or Easton or online, Annapolis, and the chapel, we are just glad to be together today. Thank you. Most of you don't know me, so I want to give a little bit of context as to who I am, give you a quick picture of my family. My name is Aaron. My wife's name is Lauren. We have 2 kids. Grayson is 4, and Lincoln is 2. So that's them. You're allowed to say, "Aw." Here's the thing. They're not that cute once they get going, all right? It's good. It's a whole thing, all right? But anyway, my family, we love the Red Sox. We love Red Sox baseball, which I know that's a little controversial around here. I don't know, you guys Orioles fans? That's a little tough. I don't know that there have been Orioles fans since like the Cal Ripken era, but that didn't land. Okay, sorry. That's a little sensitive, my bad. Anyway, so we love watching the Red Sox baseball. We love woodworking and working on our house, trying to do some DIY projects, make it a little bit more enjoyable to be in. We love doing that in our spare time. We also love having people over to our house and drinking coffee together. We just brew like Folgers and a normal drip coffee maker, but if you bring pour over with your bougie coffee, we're about it, okay? We will drink that if you bring it. But really, the reason I'm telling you all of this is just because I believe that people make more sense in context, okay? I think that this is an important thing to understand. People make more sense in context. And you've experienced this, right? Maybe somebody that you see on the news or in your everyday life, they do something, you're like, why in the world would they do that? Why are you the way that you are? Like, this is just confusing to me. And then maybe you understand a little bit about their life experiences or what they've gone through, and then they begin to make a little more sense to you, right? So I think about it like if there were a pastor, for instance, in the state of Maryland, and then all of a sudden you started seeing this pastor who lives in Maryland wearing the gear of a college like in the Deep South. It'd be confusing, right? You'd be like, what? I don't understand, how did we get here? And then, okay, he's from there. Oh, he went to school there. Oh, okay. Then this otherwise unreasonable behavior now makes sense, right? Okay. Way too soon, I think. But it's moments maybe for you is when you met the parents, right? You're dating and then you meet the parents and you see the baby pictures and you see the hometown and you're like, oh, now I get it. Okay. Please don't turn out like them. But no, regardless, people make more sense in context, right? And that's what we're going to be trying to do today. We are kicking off a series in the life of a remarkable man from the Bible named Abraham. And for the next 12 weeks, we're going to be diving into his life, looking at good moments, looking at bad moments, seeing how God shaped this man who would eventually, literally, change the world. But my responsibility today is basically just to put him in context, okay? We're going to be pulling out some baby pictures on Abraham and trying to understand why he is the way that he is. And I hope that the next 11 weeks are going to be more understandable as a result of what you learned today when you know where he got his start. I want to warn you, we're going to go over a lot of details. I'm going to, by personality, move probably pretty quickly. But we'll go over the background of his life and then hopefully apply it to our lives, ask some questions that I think could change the way that we live our lives even this week. I hope that we'll get to that practical step. But we're going to move fast. Let's jump into it together. If you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12, however you access the Bible, join me in Genesis 12. And I think this is one question that you can be asking as you turn there, okay? Kind of sit here and think for a moment. What was the biggest step of faith that God ever called you to, and you did it? Okay, what was the biggest step of faith that God called you to, and you did it? Try to pin that moment in your mind, okay? And think about that. Use that as a grid, a lens, as we look into this first moment in Abraham's life. That'll be helpful to us. If you're unfamiliar with Abraham, he is the first Israelite. And when I say the first Israelite, I mean they weren't even called Israelites. He was so first, okay? He really got in on the ground floor of the whole Jewishness thing. So, as a side note, also don't get tripped up. In the passage, he's going to be called Abram. He gets a name change later on. Both he and his wife get different names, but Abraham and Sarah are the same people we'll read about. Don't get too confused by that. But here's the thing that I think you have to understand about Abraham in the big context of what's going on in like the world, what God's doing in the world, okay? God is starting something new with this guy named Abraham, okay? Until this point in the book of Genesis, God has been dealing with all of humanity, all right? The whole world is created, though most of the world is destroyed. Global languages are created. But here, God is beginning to zero in on one family. He is doing a brand new thing. But I think the question that we have to ask is, why Abraham, right? Like as we start to look at his baby pictures, why is this the family that gets the attention? I hope that as we dive into the story, that'll make a little more sense. Again, in Genesis 12, it's in this chapter where the entire book of Genesis shifts, all right? From a global perspective, chapters 10 and 11 are actually mostly just genealogies, all right? People having babies. Lots of people, lots of kids. At the end of this long list of people having kids, we run into this guy named Terah. And verse 11, 27 through 30 is a little confusing, so we've kind of summarized it here into this graphic that I think will be helpful. Okay, long list of people having kids, and we run into this guy named Terah. Terah ends up having 3 sons, okay? Their names are Abram, Nahor, and Haran. They've all got wives. We don't know Haran's wife's name. Rest in peace. I'm sorry about that. She really missed out here. But we've got these 3 sons, okay? Nahor's got 8 sons. Haran's got 3 kids. One of them is named Lot. And Lot's going to end up being super relevant. That's Abram's nephew. He's going to come up a bunch in the story later. But Terah, here's his family tree, and that's what it looks like. Why do I show you all that? First of all, I show it to you because I'm a nerd, and I love this kind of stuff. So I just felt like it. Also, because I think God is starting a whole new thing through this guy Abraham, and his whole family is going to be relevant. So we want to understand a little bit more about them. But I got to say this. In my opinion, these people are not ideal targets for God's special attention. All right? Because it's going to turn out here soon that participating in God's special mission for the world is going to involve leaving everything that you've ever known, leaving it behind, and walking away from it all. And this family, they're pretty content, okay? As far as we can tell, they're pretty wealthy, and they live in what is probably the coolest city on the planet at the time, okay? So they've kind of got it made, right? Plus, Abraham and his whole family, they reflected the religion and the values of the culture that they lived in. We learn from other parts of Scripture that these people are polytheistic pagans, okay? So if God, he's going to start something new, and he's surveying like all the families in the world, which one should I pick? These people, in my mind, they are not ideal targets. I mean, they're successful. They're surrounded by the best their culture has to offer. Why in the world would they leave that behind? But anytime in the Bible that you see unlikely people become the center of the story, put your antennas up. God is up to something. Okay, he loves using unlikely people. He loves it. And Abraham is not the guy that we should be looking at if you're picking special people, okay? Because of where he's from, he's in a hopping city. Second of all, because of what he believes, he's a polytheistic pagan. But third of all, because of something a little bit more important and kind of obvious. Here's the thing about Abram. He doesn't have any kids. And he's supposed to be the father of a nation, okay? That's like the definition of a deal breaker. Not only does he not have kids, his wife is barren. After 2 chapters of genealogies of just people having babies, the only couple that doesn't have any babies is Abram and Sarah. They're the worst pick. If you just liked Terah's sons and you just wanted to pick one of them, pick Nahor. He's got 8 boys. That's a great start. No, that's not what we do. Abram, no kids. You're supposed to catch that. We're like, what is going on here? He is not a great option. Once again, antennas up. God's up to something. So let's see what God says to Abraham to get this party started. This is Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Here's what it says. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house. Okay, so as we get started, not super subtle, this command from God, go. Just leave everything you know and go. Seriously right now, right? I mean, here's a guy who's been a polytheistic pagan his whole life. And literally out of the blue, some deity shows up to him and demands, as the first thing, a really scary act of sacrificial obedience. I mean, think about this, guy. Abraham is not sitting around like hoping a new religion pops up on the scene. Right? He probably, like you, thought he was doing just fine, like kind of had it figured out a little bit. So imagine for you, what would it take for you to uproot everything you've ever known? Not just your religion, your entire family tree, and go somewhere else. Just move it. That better be a pretty, awesome vision, right? Better be pretty cool. It's incredible that Abraham even entertains this idea. It's so wild. We aren't even done with the command yet. We haven't even read all of verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Okay. If it's me, I'm going to be super honest. If I'm Abraham, I'm going to have some feedback for God right here. Okay. Look, the land I will show you, that is so vague. That's incredibly unhelpful. Can I get a bearing? Can I get a landmark? Can I get a general direction? Nothing? The land, I'm a GPS guy, okay? I put everything in my GPS. I mean everything. Like every day on the way to work, I put it in my GPS. I think that's diagnosable. We can talk about that later. But you cannot put the land that I will show you in the GPS. You want to know how I know? I tried this morning. And you can try it too. Google Maps cannot find the land I will show. If Google Maps can't find it, you ain't finding it. All right? What is the land I will show you? This is super unhelpful. This is crazy. These people are comfortable. Why would they do this? And here, I think, is where this story gets really interesting. God offers some pretty amazing incentives to Abraham. So check this out in verse 2 and 3. It says, and I will make of you this is Abram speaking God speaking to Abram. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse. And in you, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. And what you've just heard is one of the most significant turning points in all of human history. This is the formal beginning of God's rescue plan for the planet. These verses, ultimately what they're outlining for the first time ever, is what's called in theological terms the Abrahamic Covenant, okay? And this covenant is the foundation of God's relationship to his people. And I need you to hear this. The rest of the story of the Bible hinges on this promise. The rest of the story of the Bible hinges on this promise. And God is ultimately promising Abraham three things in this. First of all, he's promising him a land. He's promising him a land. As in like a physical place where you could take a flag and plant it and say, this is mine, okay? A place, a land. Second of all, he's promising him a nation. AKA, you're going to have so many kids that group of kids could be reasonably defined as a nation. That's a lot of children, okay? A nation. Third of all, he is saying, blessings. I am going to bless you. Anyone who doesn't bless you, you got me on your side. In fact, to the point that the entire world is going to experience blessing through you as a conduit. And this is incredible. I mean, think about this. Pause. Think about this from Abraham's perspective, okay? These are stunning promises. This is the creator of the universe committing himself to be your number one defender. He is personally guaranteeing not only a large number of descendants, but also a place for those large number of descendants to live, while those large number of descendants live out their global destiny to bless the world. This is amazing. But remember this. These promises are currently being made to a dude in his 70s with no kids and a barren wife. If this is going to work, it's going to be the biggest comeback in human history. But remember, antennas are up. God loves working in impossible situations. He loves it. So to this point, God has told Abraham, hey, leave everybody and just start walking to a new place. Don't worry, I'll show you where it's going to be. And how does Abraham respond to that? Well, there are two moments in his response that I want to focus on because I think they're kind of a framework that we can use to think about our own response to this situation. So the first moment, two critical moments I think we can look at are, the first one is his departure. It's Abram's departure. And we're going to explore that, first of all, in verse 4. So let's look at this first moment in verse 4. God has asked all this, and here's what happened. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. He went? Hold up here a second. Are you kidding me? He actually went? I mean, do you realize what you're reading here, guys? He actually did it. Like the crazy thing that God asked him to do of like leave everything you've known with this brand new deity and walk into the desert to a place that you've never seen. He actually does it? That's nonsense. That is completely ridiculous. This should stop us in our tracks as we're reading. Because look, here's the thing. I grew up in church. My dad's a pastor. I went to Bible college and seminary. I feel like I'm relatively familiar with the Bible, and I know that you are too. If you're part of Bay Area, you're doing chapter a day for the rest of your life, you're familiar with the Bible. But look, we have a terrible habit when it comes to reading the Bible, and that is we skim it, right? I mean, we know where this is going, so it's like, okay, yeah, I'm just kind of reading quickly. But we can't do that. We cannot do that with the scriptures. Zoom in, slow down, feel this moment with Abraham. His choice to go, it's insane. It doesn't make any sense. I think this is a perfect illustration of what Ed Stetzer said a month ago at Souls, where he was talking, he said, put your yes on the table and let God put it on the map, right? This is nuts. Abraham literally does not know where he's going, but he goes anyway. This should knock us over. And here's the question I think we should ask about it. What would compel him to go? What would compel him to go? What would compel a childless man and his barren wife to leave the gods that he has worshipped and the family that he knows and the culture that he understands to begin walking to an undisclosed location to build a family that he cannot have, receive blessings that he cannot touch at the request of a God that he cannot see? What would compel him to do this? The answer is faith. Faith is what would compel him to do this. In fact, we see this in the New Testament, in Hebrews chapter 11, where it describes Abraham. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed. When he was called to go to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And when he went out, not knowing where he was going. He's going by faith. He's boldly stepping out into the unknown, believing that this mysterious new God was going to come through for him. What is faith anyway, right? Maybe you're unfamiliar with faith or you're just looking for a definition. We're going to define it this way throughout the course of the series, so this will come up again. But faith is the confident conviction that God, first of all, is who he says he is. And second of all, he will do what he says he will do. In other words, it's confidence or conviction in God's, first of all, his character. And second of all, it's confidence in his capacity. That God is who he says, he is trustworthy, and he also can follow through on the things that he promises. That's faith. And we're going to be saying a lot in this series because it's the point of this series, to point out the both profound and also imperfect ways that Abraham demonstrated faith over the course of his life. And that's what he's doing. Right here, in this departure, he is allowing faith to radically drive him to depart from his life as he knew it. And that's the first of the two critical moments, is his departure. But the second one that we have to see is the journey. The journey. There are two critical moments. And this one we actually see play out in verse 4 and 5. Here's what it says. Abram was 75 years old. Okay, once again, don't read past that. That's crazy. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Okay, here we go. The first moment is his decision to go, like, okay, we're going to do this. And the next moment is the actual journey from here to there. And that's what we just read. The whole family's ready. It's all packed. They got their car and the moving truck fully packed with the trailer on the back and the car on the trailer on the back behind the other car, okay? Fully packed, ready to rock, and they start to walk. And this is where I would be picturing like the home video clips start rolling, okay? Life is a Highway by Rascal Flatts is playing while they're driving down the road. Oh, they got a flat tire. Oh, they're pulling into a rest stop. Here's some selfies on Route 66 with the fam, you know. Somebody falls asleep in the car, like whipped cream in the face, pulling a prank, whatever. Like that's what I'm picturing, like fun family trip, right? And in fact, for me, I would be expecting a lot of details right here in this moment, okay? Because this is a super important moment in Abraham's life. I'm also a detail person. I love getting the details. And I personally feel like my whole life is lived in the space that we're about to read about from Abraham. The space between what God has called me to do, the faith step, and the arrival at the destination. Right? Don't you feel like we live in that season? Like I know what he's asked me to do, and I'm starting to walk, but I haven't gotten there yet, right? That's my whole life. So I'm like, yo, Abraham, give me some hot tips, right? What's it like to live in that phase? How do I do this day to day? I'm hoping for some details. So let's see what we get. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan when they came to the land of Canaan. That's it? Where are the details? Did they get any flat tires? Was the flight delayed? Like, what happened? What happened on the journey? We don't get anything. That's all we get? And once again, I'd be willing to bet most of us have read right past that every time we've read Genesis 12 because we already know what happens. But think about it. This is one of the most important and difficult moments of Abraham's entire life. He's going on a journey to literally only God knows where. Every day, he sets out with just enough information to make it to the end of the day. He's setting up camp, and he's saying to God at the end of every day, are we there yet? No? Okay. All right. Keep walking. And we don't get any information about that phase of his life? That's frustrating. But as frustrating as it is to me, I love the fact that we don't get any information because that means there's nothing to describe. It's just simple faith, walking to where God wanted them to walk. And then, eventually, over time, they finally arrive at their destination. Look at verse 6. Check this out. Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. That's going to be super relevant in a couple books. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, here we go, I will give this land. So Abram built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. This is it. God tells him, look, this is it. Plant a flag. This is going to be your territory. You have arrived. And Abraham responds the only way that we could respond to a moment like that. He responds with worship. He praises the God who was faithful to come through on the promises that he had made. And there we have it, chapter 1 of the origin story of the great biblical character of Abraham. From his call, his birth, his call from Ur all the way to the land of Canaan. But what about us? Okay? What does this mean for us? As we put Abraham in context and understand this first story in his life, there are two major lessons that I think that we have to learn about faith. And I think these two come directly from the two kind of moments that we talked about. So what could we learn from Abraham's departure? Okay? The first thing I think we need to respond or think about is this, that faith drives obedience. Faith drives obedience. This is what's connected to Abraham's departure. Because without a confident conviction that God was going to come through for him, Abraham would have never stepped foot out of his door, right? And that same dynamic is true in our lives. Obedience is not something that we drum up out of a vacuum. It's something that's born of faith, something that's born of conviction, something that's born of the work that God has already done in our life through Christ. We have to have passionate faith that is fully convinced about who God is and what he's capable of. And we have to have it to the point that we are willing to do literally anything that he calls us to do. I mean, it's this kind of radical faith that calls people out of their lucrative careers and into unknown places around the world to spread the message of Jesus, right? I mean, it's this kind of faith that drove my friend to radically downsize his home. And rather than taking those profits and dumping it into his 401k, he directly invested them into the work of the ministry in a post-Christian city. It's the kind of faith this radical faith that would drive a stay-at-home mom to see every single play date, not as just a chance to get away from the kids, but as a God-sent, absolutely time-sensitive mission from God to spread the love of Jesus. It's the kind of faith that takes a college student and makes them willing to accept whatever labels and whatever mockery comes from being willing to stand on a humble conviction that biblical morality matters. It's this kind of radical obedience that could look like departing from your house to take the dangerous journey across the street and talk to someone about Jesus. Or it could be radical faith that causes you to literally sell everything you have and go to a place that you don't even know yet. Or go on a short-term missions trip. Or find a person in your neighborhood that could use your generosity and so lavish the love of Christ on them that the only explanation for it is God's work in your life. God is calling all of us to a journey of faith with him, to Abrahamic, risk-taking, world-shaking, radical obedience. And I think the question that we have to answer is this: will I allow faith to drive me to radical obedience? I remember that moment I asked you to think about early on in the message. What was that big moment of faith and you did it? Well, then what's your next one? And will I allow faith to drive me to do radical obedience? Abraham was willing. He held nothing back. He left the world that he knew behind him for the sake of following God. So would you ask the Lord this week, do you have a radical step of obedience for me? And will you please, this is the hard part, give me the courage to do it? I think the next thing we have to learn is this. Faith drives obedience is from his departure, but faith doesn't drive, it walks. And this is the lesson we learned from Abraham's journey. Faith doesn't drive, it walks. And that's kind of confusing. I just said faith drives, now it doesn't drive. Like, what are we saying here? Like, let me try to make sense of this. The point I'm making is that at Abraham's departure, he's full of faith, he's full of radical obedience, and he does something that is completely crazy, something that is motivated by or driven by faith. But remember, the actual activity that he does is walk. The man just starts walking. And I'm going to walk sideways because I bet he walked sideways. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't really do that. That was not funny. Okay. He's just walking. And look, this is not fast. This is not cool. This is not worthy of Instagram in any way. Not even a story that disappears after 24 hours, right? He's just walking. Ordinary walking. And Paul picks up on this metaphor in 2 Corinthians, and he says this: for we walk by faith, not by sight. We walk by faith, explicitly connecting together the idea of walking and faith. And imagine how un-American and unproductive that metaphor is, right? I mean, he could have said, run by faith. He could have said, achieve by faith. He could have said excel or any other action-oriented and glamorous word. But by the power of the Holy Spirit, he chose the word walk. Walk. It's the perfect word to describe a life of faith. Walking. It is both slow and mundane, and more often than not, it's not impressive. I mean, even when the New Testament tells us to run the race, it's the race of endurance. It's a marathon. In other words, you got to pace yourself. It's not that fun to watch a marathon. Sorry to all the marathon runners. There's a reason that you're only there at like the start and the finish line, right? Because it's just not that fun. It's long. It's slow. And if you're anything like me, that is infuriating. Because I just the idea of slowing down makes me annoyed. I'm the guy who makes a to-do list on every morning in vacation because I just want to feel accomplished. Okay? Again, I know it's diagnosable. We can talk about it. But almost nothing in my life is done slowly. I mean, you can tell. I talk really fast, right? I like to do everything fast. I type fast. I try to walk fast. I probably drive too fast. I try to fall asleep fast. That's also weird, I know. But I just like to do everything fast. And even better is when I can do things fast and important. When I can do efficient things famously. Get lots of high fives, right? We all love that feeling. But what God has continually shown me in my marriage and in my parenting and in ministry is the simple fact that walking by faith is a lot like an alarm clock on Monday morning that goes off way too early, right? It's a lot like another dirty diaper on a kid that ought to be potty trained by now. Walking by faith is that prayer that I prayed a couple days ago, walking up to my 4-year-old's room for another moment of discipline, just thinking, I have no idea what to say. How do I help this kid? God, give me patience. I think that's walking by faith, right? And we have to recognize that whatever faith prayers we're praying for these radical steps of ordinary obedience, we are simply walking. Because for the vast majority of us, our life is not made up of these radical grand series of life-defining events. It's just walking out simple obedience. And that is our act of radical faith. And coming off a year like this one, man, where probably nobody accomplished all that they wanted, it's so important that we embrace the fact that sometimes the radical step of faith that God is calling to us to is ordinary obedience. Ordinary, not extraordinary, not efficient, anonymous, quiet, unseen obedience. And so the question I think that we have to answer in this moment is, am I bored with ordinary obedience? Am I bored with it? Have I allowed myself to think that actually seeing the people around me to the point that I could notice their needs and meet their needs with the love of Jesus, have I convinced myself that that is somehow not radical faith? Have I allowed myself to glamorize the idea of dying a martyr's death for the sake of Christ and forgotten that God has called me to lay aside my preferences and put them to death every day for the sake of loving my wife as Christ loved the church? He gave his life. Have I glamorized the extraordinary and forgotten about the ordinary? And so this week, I dare you, ask the Lord, what is the next step of faith that I need to take this week? And specifically, what ordinary act of radical obedience are you calling me to? We need to be convinced that God is as much at work in the mundane as he is in the miraculous. The example of Abraham leaves us with no option, because he chose radical obedience in those big moments, and then radically ordinary walking. Faith requires nothing less. And I just want to close with this point. Abraham is a good example. He really is. We've got a lot to learn from him. But he's just one broken person in a long line of broken people. But Abraham's most important characteristic is that he received a promise. A promise that from his line, there would be another one who would come from that same land where he's put his feet, and that person's name is Jesus. And Jesus is the reason that we're here today. Jesus is the reason that last week we gathered with billions of Christians around the world to celebrate that Jesus is alive. And he is the reason that there's no fear in death. He is the reason that we can take radically ordinary steps of obedience. He's the one who not only empowers it, but makes it worthwhile. Jesus is what makes faith possible. And it's radically ordinary faith in him that God is calling us to this week. Would you pray with me? Oh Lord, we are so aware of our flaws. It's just crazy for me to think about how much we need you in our everyday lives. How this morning I've had to pray for faith to just do the thing that you've prepared us to do today. Give us that strength to not only do the everyday, but the things that will change the course of our life, and do it by faith in the one that you sent for us. Because we know without faith, it's impossible to please you. And it is by faith in the Son of God that we live this life. In Christ's name.